I was 15 years old, and I was so frustrated that our life was just not getting better as a family that I told my mom, why don't you start a business? Now everybody's starting a business. That was during the time when Bulgaria was no longer a communist country. And she said, what are you talking about? I'm a doctor. The only thing I can do is to be a doctor. And healthcare in Bulgaria at that time was part of the government. The government owned it. It was public. It was a socialist healthcare system, and still is. And so I thought, well, I'll start a business then. And my parents sort of rolled their eyes, and they said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I will start roasting. I'll start buying raw peanuts, because my hometown was surrounded by peanut farms. And I said, I will roast them, I'll package them in 100-gram packages, and I'll resell them through wholesale retailers to resellers to restaurants, because in Bulgaria, peanuts are an appetizer. They're eaten with alcohol, and Bulgarians consume a lot of alcohol, so they consume a lot of peanuts with the alcohol. And I thought, restaurants make money on the alcohol, but they don't make money on the peanuts, and it takes up a lot of time for the chefs to do that, to roast peanuts. So I'm just gonna, start doing that. My parents were, no way, like this is so embarrassing. The daughter of two doctors is gonna go do that. So I convinced my dad to drive me to the local peanut farm, and he hid. He dropped me off about 3 blocks away so that nobody would recognize him, that he's the dad of this 14, 15-year-old that is negotiating with an old woman selling raw peanuts. So I bought with my savings, I bought my first 10 kilograms of peanuts. I went home, I roasted them, I packaged them, and I left them in a big Costco-like store that one of my friends' dads owned. In 2 days, they called me and they said, "Bring more if you have." Of course, they did me a favor. They never kept any of the profits. They thought, hey, they're doing a favor to a friend of their sons. But I started making real money, so much so that it became a real enterprise. I had to start paying for my dad's gas, for the electricity, I even paid my 6 years old younger than me brother to help me pack the peanuts in packages. And so I started making more money than my parents. Now, 2 doctors that had spent 20 years of their lives studying to be, my mother was a surgeon, ear, nose, and throat surgeon. She did facial reconstructive surgeries. My dad was a neurologist, and I, at 15, selling peanuts, was making more money than them. That was wrong, right? Like, any way you look at it, that wasn't right. And that, to me, I think, was the time when I decided Bulgaria at that time wasn't for me. Like, I had to look for opportunities elsewhere because I wanted the effort I was putting in to pay off. And I looked for me, being in a place like the US was the ultimate dream. I thought of it as the land of opportunities, and that was at first the impetus for coming here. It wasn't very easy because I didn't know how to apply. I did not know many people at that time who had applied to schools in the US. I didn't know how to do it. So it was a long process, but essentially I went to the US Embassy. I asked them how I can apply. They said, well, look at this Barron's book that we have of an index of all the schools in the US. So I went through that book and one by one picked every single university that gave any form of financial aid to international students. I wrote down the addresses of 100 schools, and I sent letters, handwritten letters to all of them saying, do you give financial aid to foreigners, and how? And if so, tell me how I can apply to your school. All of them responded and told me I had to take the SAT. Well, I didn't know how or where or what the SAT was. So I went back to the US Embassy. They gave me this another old book, a Barron's book that was as old as I was at that time, 20-year-old book with 7 practice tests. And they said, well, that's the SAT book. I snuck out the book, photocopied it in one afternoon, put it back in the library of the consulate, and went back home and started studying English. I read Charles Dickens. I read old copies of Newsweek. I read anything in English that I could put my hands on. I was in an English language school, but it's different when you study English as a second language. How many of you study some language as a second language? Yeah. Can you imagine going to an SAT and taking the SAT in that language?
Merci.
It's very different, exactly. Merci beaucoup, exactly. And so I started preparing, and I rationed my 7 tests so that I can track progress. And I had this one shot of taking the SAT because it was very expensive, and it was only administered 2 or 3 times a year. I went and I took the test. I did very well. I was very happy with my result. I had 800 on math and 780 on verbal.
Stop bragging.
just to give you an example of how hard I worked, I wanted it so bad to come here. And I applied to 50 schools. I asked every single one of them to waive the application fee because I couldn't afford it. Except every school except for two.
You can name them.
Honored Stanford and UPenn. And they did not want to honor the request for waiving the application fee.
Look what they missed out on.
There you go. Well, I did end up going to Stanford, but afterwards, you're right.
Oh, that's true.
So what happened was, so I applied, and I was very lucky. I got into 12 schools on full scholarship.
Wow.
I ended up going to Harvard because it was the one school I had heard the most about. And it was incredible. My parents had never been outside of Bulgaria. My grandparents had never been outside of Bulgaria. When I told my parents I want to go to the US, it was exactly the same as if I had told them I'm going to be building a rocket ship in the backyard and going to the moon. It was exactly as likely in their heads that this was going to happen. It felt so foreign, so far away. It felt like a different world, different planet, because of how small and closed society in Bulgaria was. So in '98, I came to Boston and started studies at Harvard.